Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride, and joining me tonight on my left is Chris McCusker from the SNP Socialists and the SNP Trade Union Group. So
Good
Chris,
evening,
how are
Kenny.
you?
Thank you very much. Second night in a row, I must be doing something right.
Did you have a good New Year, Chris?
I had a very quiet New Year. I had a better Christmas because my boys were down from Dundee and Aberdeen, so that was good, but
Very good.
New Year was quiet, thankfully. Gave my liver a wee break.
Well, our first story tonight, Sajid Javid has claimed that his first budget will kickstart a decade of renewal for the UK economy after announcing the 11th of March as the date for the delayed set-piece event. The Chancellor said his package would focus on unleashing Britain's potential after the country's departure from the EU at the end of this month. It's been reported that Javid will announce a shake-up of the way the Treasury allocates investment in an attempt to even up spending between the regions. The Chancellor also plans to set up a task force designed to make his department an engine of economic change. Javid's plans to ramp up investment spending by billions of pounds will allow the government to borrow for capital projects. Tax and spending measures will focus on health, the environment and the cost of living. The Chancellor said, "People across the country have told us that they want change. We've listened and will now deliver. With this budget, we will unleash Britain's potential, uniting our great country, opening a new chapter for our economy, and ushering in a decade of renewal." So, Chris, I suspect I can predict how you're going to react to that kind of quote from a Tory Chancellor.
Sorry.
So what do you think of what Sajid Javid had to say?
This is absolutely wild. For him to say that he's been listening to the UK electorate is, it's like something from a Disney movie. I mean, what script is this guy reading, for God's sake? I caught a bit of Parliament today, and it just reinforced their bullish nature to march on with their agenda no matter what, carry on regardless, is pretty much the theme of the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was always going to be the outcome of this election, though, wasn't it? That big majority that Boris Johnson's got now, there's very little compromise that the Tories need to think about.
Well, yeah, but I need to. I'm glad that you brought that up, Kenny, because I need to bring up the fact that although there is a Tory majority in the House of Commons, the majority of the voting electorate actually voted not for the Tory agenda. And this has to be highlighted. Yeah. And, thankfully we've got a platform such as Broadcasting Scotland to highlight this.
Well, of course, especially in Scotland. I mean, that's the whole argument for independence in a nutshell, isn't it? That you can have an 80-seat majority while having lost drastically in Scotland.
Well, yeah, but it's also worth noting the fact that, that the parties in Wales and Northern Ireland, all the devolved nations did not vote for the Tory agenda. Mm-hmm. So, and they have to take that into consideration. Mm-hmm. Rather than just, as I say, carry on regardless and we'll do whatever with complete impunity and, you just can shout from the sidelines if you like, but we're not going to listen.
We have seen this claim, of course, that they're going to rebalance spending in the regions. Do you think this is just the Northern Powerhouse rebranded? Is this them trying to shore up some of the Labour seats in the north and the Midlands that they've taken already?
I think that the Northern Powerhouse is dead. Now that they've punched severe pockets into the red wall up in the north. I think they will just, continue to play platitudes and not actually give it serious investment, what it needs. And obviously, they don't do that. They're never going to give Scotland any extra money.
Well, on that note, obviously Scotland would be eligible for Barnett consequentials from any increased spending in England that is supposedly being promised. But there has been quite a bit of upset in Scotland because of the timing of this. Derek Mackay said that the UK government's approach to the Scottish budget is completely unacceptable. The delay of over 4 months since their original planned date cannot be blamed on the general election and suggests a disregard for devolution and a lack of fiscal responsibility. The failure of the UK government to publish its budget at an earlier time means we do not have the clarity on the funding available for our schools, hospitals and other vital public services. Despite this, we remain focused on introducing a Scottish budget for 2020 to 21 at the earliest practical opportunity. And Patrick Harvey, co-leader of the Greens, pointed out an even bigger deadline that affects this. For the UK government to set out its budget on the 11th of March shows contempt for devolution and for local government. That is the day Scottish councils are legally obliged to set their council tax rates. This has left Derek Mackay with the unenviable task of proposing a budget for Scotland without knowing exactly how much money he has or what the tax forecasts will be. And I mean, this is, just a basic disregard for how the UK operates.
It's a complete lack of respect. And it's not just Derek Mackay that is saying this and Patrick Harvey, but COSLA are jumping all over this as well, because as you quite rightly say, that is the legal date that councils have to set their budget. And you just can't pluck figures out of the sky and hope that you're going to be able to round it up to the nearest 100 or hundreds of thousands or something like that. So it really is. It shows scant regard for Scotland. It shows scant regard for the councils, and it smacks in the face of Sajid Javid saying that he's wanting to renew the UK Treasury and how it works, and and streamline it and make it more attractive. Honestly, it's the words that I want to come out with. I don't really want to say on air. Do you know what I mean? Because it really is. It's shocking. It is absolutely shocking.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is a bigger problem for Scotland than a delayed budget at Westminster. Things just keep ticking over. But of course, in Scotland, without the budget being set, the Scottish government is not able to spend money.
Yeah.
And the Scottish budget process is not just the Chancellor standing up and making a speech. There's committee processes. The Parliament has to vote on it. There have to be amendments. And there's also always got to be a certain amount of negotiation for a Scottish budget to be passed as well. So it puts the whole process into a very compressed time period where Derek Mackay's got to write it, in a very short space of time. And then it's got to get through Parliament very quickly as well.
Yeah. The other thing as well is the fact that it's not as simple as, right, okay, we'll just go with last year's budget. Mm-hmm. Because obviously things change. So he is on an unenviable task, but he's on a hiding to nothing, because if he undercuts it and gets it wrong, then obviously the Tories, the Scottish Tories, are going to hit him over the head with it. If he over-exaggerates it and gets it wildly wrong on the other sphere, then obviously the Scottish Tories are going to jump on him. So he is between a rock and a hard place, and it's through, it's not through his own doing. This is done
entirely down to Westminster
by
government.
The UK Treasury.
Yeah, I mean, this was Philip Hammond, of course, originally pushed the budget back to the autumn, which would have been a lot more helpful. But then in the run-up to the election, with the election on the horizon, it was postponed, and that's why this is all fallen this way. So it's a real problem, and we'll have to just I guess wait and see how it all shakes out. But Derek Mackay has asked for a draft of the budget at least at the earliest possible date. Of course, we just have to wait and see whether.
Well, the other thing as well, I caught a piece of Parliament today, and Alison Thewlis made the point that the least that the Treasury could do would be to produce a draft and give us at least an indication of what the Barnett consequentials could possibly be for Scotland, so that we could, in a sort of like a roundabout way,
sketch it
out, you know, as best we can. But that didn't actually meet with, you know, 100% agreement, you know, coming from the Tories dispatch box. So, you know, it doesn't look good, to be honest with you. I don't think it will get sorted out in the immediate future. I think it's, you know, it's, if anything, it's going to be, you know, very lastminute.com.
Yeah. Especially, of course, with with the Brexit deadline on the horizon and all the fallout that's going to follow that. Also in Westminster today at Cabinet, Boris Johnson and the Chancellor, Sajid Javid, unveiled a plan for what was described as tough decisions on spending ahead of the budget and the subsequent spending review. Ministers need to root out any waste, particularly anything that is not aligned with the government's priorities, and demonstrate value for money of every pound of taxpayers' money that we spend, they told the meeting, according to a Number 10 spokesperson. All Secretaries of State were encouraged to go through every project at their department in detail to ensure that any waste is rooted out, excuse me, and that Johnson's other stated priority of spreading wealth around the country is also being met. So, you know, every new government promises that it's going to root out waste, it's going to cut bureaucracy, it's going to find savings from all over the place. Do you have any confidence that Sajid Javid and Boris Johnson can make that happen?
Well, yes, if they actually take up my suggestion.
What's your suggestion?
Disband the House of Lords.
Well, that's a very good shout.
Do you know what I mean? Get rid of it completely, save money overnight, and just, you know, turn it into a fairground attraction or something like that for Wayne's, or I don't know, but just get rid of it. I was telling Gordon last night that I read Tommy Shepherd's report on the House of Lords and how Scotland, you know, is obviously not
represented there. Yeah.
And the SNP have vowed never to take a peerage, but the inequality of you know, how it's top heavy of Liberals, Labour, and Tory. You know, that get there, sit on, and they never discuss Scotland.
No.
They never discuss Scotland. It's a waste of time. It's an archaic Dickensian. You know, what was it? What was it Gordon said last night? It's like a massive big hotel, a big sleeping hotel. Do you know what I mean? It's that itself. £300 a day they get, plus expenses.
Yeah.
Think of the vast savings that they could get from that. So if you're listening, Boris,
well, I'm
shut
sure
the doors.
I'm sure Boris Johnson is a keen viewer of Scotland at 7 and always takes policy advice from people such as yourself, Chris.
Indeed, a raving socialist. The other thing as well, that it has to be pointed out that Boris Johnson was not in Parliament today.
Really?
He did not step into the chamber, not in the Treasury questions, and currently at the moment they're debating the Brexit amendments.
Bill. Yeah.
So, you know, again, that just shows a lack of complete disregard for you know, the whole process.
Well, of course, he's still recovering from his holiday, of course.
Well, yeah.
Needs a holiday to go over the holiday.
Maybe his girlfriend's peeling off the skin on his back.
Please don't. I mean, these waste, you know, cutting waste exercises. I mean, David Cameron had his bonfire of the Quangos in 2010. It ended up costing twice as much as he had thought it would, which is pretty much the opposite of what a waste reduction effort is meant to do. So, I mean, cutting waste very often means cutting jobs.
Yeah, but then if you've got MPs that are willing to put expenses in for paper clips and for breakfasts and, you know, and taxis and, you know, and daft things, you know, if you think through the duck ponds, that was the one I was thinking about. You know, it'll never happen. It'll never happen. Do you know what I mean? It's you know, Tories are what Tories do. Do you know what I mean? So, you know, it is, again, it's for me, it's just platitudes. That's that. You know, he's just coming out with all the right things that a prime minister normally says once he's been re-elected. Now
Get a
he's
good
got
headline in the Express and
yeah,
move on.
and the Daily Mail.
And the Daily Mail. Oh, yeah, well. Anyway, moving on. Oh wow! Just got a word in my ear that Nicky Morgan is going to be keeping her. She's left the House of Commons, but she's keeping her
as a peerage
as she gets the peerage.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's as you say. Tories are as Tories
do.
Yes.
Does that mean that she, as an unelected MP, although she's a Lord, she'll be able to enter the chamber in order to take part in the
debates? I'm not 100%
debates?
sure how the rules work on that. We will have to wait and see, I suppose.
But
anyway,
with the Tories, there are no rules.
certainly with these Tories, the rules are rarely, if ever, followed well. Anyway, moving on. Back at Holyrood, the Tory government plan to grant themselves the powers to overrule MSPs on devolved areas, according to a new independent report. Analysis by the Scottish Parliament Information Centre warns that the EU Withdrawal Agreement Bill will allow UK ministers acting alone to make provision in devolved policy areas. The SNP has challenged the Scottish Tory leadership candidates to stand against this deeply undemocratic attack on the Scottish Parliament, asking them to choose between loyalty to Boris Johnson and loyalty to the people of Scotland and their Parliament. The Tories have been accused for years of using Brexit as a smokescreen for a power grab on devolved matters, with the Tory manifesto also pledging to look at the broader aspects of our constitution after Brexit. Commenting on this news, Tom Arthur MSP said, "It's deeply troubling that Westminster has ploughed ahead with an undemocratic power grab, threatening Holyrood's powers under the guise of Brexit. Far from taking powers back to Westminster, the clear view of the Scottish electorate is that more decisions should be made at Holyrood to create a fairer and more prosperous country." Well, I mean, this is a wee bit dog bites man news from Spice here. I think we all knew that there were parts of the Brexit bill that were going to take powers away from Scotland.
Yeah, and despite their denials, Fluffy Mundell constantly said, that a settlement that would reflect the whole of the UK and not just Scotland would be sought for, and that's why powers had to be centralised. Even although he said, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to be losing any powers. It just means that the powers that are coming back from the EU are not coming up north. So therefore, we're going to be able to, basically have carte blanche and do what they want. And Tom's actually quite right, because what the majority, if the Tories were level-headed enough to realise the fact that they had lost, 7 MPs, that basically they were cut in half, and Scotland does not embrace the Boris Johnson dream of Brexit, then it would be unwise for them to support this, because, or should I say, to oppose it, because if they do, they will dwindle even further come 2021.
I mean, whether or not people support independence, there has always been a strong majority in Scotland for virtually all powers. When they're asked about individually, virtually every power, people say, "Oh, that should be decided at Holyrood."
Yeah. With the grand exception of Scottish Labour, because time and time again they want us to do things regarding transport and employment
but then
law,
actively
and
campaign against
campaign for
those
the powers not to come back here.
Now, there is due to be a legislative consent motion discussed at Holyrood tomorrow regarding the Brexit bill. I think there's probably a strong likelihood that will not pass, given this report from Spice. How do you think that vote will go, though? How do you think the Tories in Holyrood are likely to respond?
It would be interesting to see how Labour respond, and if Labour actually back up the Tories in that vote. That's going to be a clear indicator of the future.
The party of devolution.
Well, yeah, and also the general direction of travel in which Scottish Labour wish to go.
Sure.
You know, because we've heard warm words coming from Monica Lennon and Kezia Dugdale and stuff like that about the fact that you know, maybe it is time that Labour woke up and smelt the coffee with regards independence. But you know, if they fall down on the side of the Tories, then that gives you, you know, it pretty much tells you all that you need to know about, you know, red Labour and, well, red Tory and blue Tory, should I say, you know.
I mean, obviously we'll have coverage of that tomorrow, so we'll hopefully be able to discuss that in more depth tomorrow and what the fallout may be as we move forward. But another story today, a total of 3,320 families in Scotland claiming help with housing costs are £64 a week worse off because of UK welfare cuts. The third annual report on welfare reform found that about 460,000 working age households have been affected by a £300 million cut in welfare spending in Scotland by the UK government. Since the rollout of universal credit, rent arrears in Scotland have increased, and as of March 2019, arrears on all council properties was £74 million, up £9 million on the previous year. The Scottish Government has spent more than £63 million on discretionary housing payments to top up benefit shortfalls and help people pay their rent so that they don't run up arrears. Housing Minister Kevin Stewart said UK government welfare cuts are squeezing more families into poverty and leaving them struggling to afford appropriate accommodation. As the private rental market becomes increasingly less accessible to those on low incomes, cutting housing benefit by £64 per week for some families puts them at risk of homelessness. The UK government must act urgently to reverse these cuts and support those renting in the private sector. I mean, this is perhaps not surprising to anybody who's been paying attention to welfare reforms, but I mean, deeply disturbing, isn't it? 3,320 families, £64 a week worse off in their housing support.
But then that then goes back to the earlier piece that we were talking about Boris Johnson wanting to save money and streamline various departments and stuff like that and all the rest of it. You know, I mean, he's cut in the last 10 years. The Department of Work and Pensions has been completely streamlined to the point of I think it's 4-in-1, right? When I say 4-in-1, there are 4 people for every one in the DWP who are actively cutting money from, you know, low income families and stuff like that. The one is the sole employee of the DWP who will go against the people who are
actually advocating, seeking tax.
Right. So you know, I think it should be reversed. It should be 4 people that should be investigating people that are evading tax, and you know, only one person sort of like looking at cutting people's benefits. But that's not the way that the Tories do things. No. And everything is geared towards the corporate mantra, and more so in Scotland now, where we see that house prices are actually rising in Scotland, and people are taking advantage of that, and harking back to the Green MSP for Edinburgh. I can't remember the chap's name. He's very much on board with the whole Airbnb thing, where people are buying, Andy Whiteman, where people are buying properties and they're just renting them back out on Airbnb in order to get a quick profit. And that is, again, shrinking the housing market within Scotland, and it's limiting the amount of affordable housing for people on low income. You know, so it is actually shocking that the UK government can do this based on. We have to remember that house prices in Scotland compared to England are still vastly different.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you watch it. My cousin watches that Escape to the Chateau thing.
Oh, yeah.
You know, where this guy and his partner bought a chateau in France for the same price as a one-bedroom flat in Willesden. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, a flat in Willesden is £350,000, and you can buy a feckin' chateau. And yet, you know, they are basically saying £64 a week. That goes for people in London the same as it goes for people in Scotland.
Absolutely.
So you know, it just shows the breadth of inequality that the Tory government are, you know, pursuing.
Absolutely. So, back at Westminster, Ian Blackford MP has said that the SNP's new team at Westminster will be a strong opposition to Boris Johnson's extreme Tory government, as he shook up his front bench team to include a number of newly elected MPs. Among the new appointments announced today are SNP Westminster Deputy Leader Kirsty Blackman taking on a key strategic role leading on the Constitution. Alison Thewliss MP becomes Shadow Chancellor. Alan Smith MP becomes Shadow Foreign Secretary. Dr Philippa Whitford MP becomes Shadow Secretary of State for exiting the EU. Former journalist and broadcaster John Nicholson becomes Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. Mary Black becomes Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland. Kirsten Oswald becomes Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and Wales. Stuart MacDonald MP becomes Shadow Attorney General. Anne McLaughlin MP becomes Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities. And David Linden MP becomes the Shadow Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. Ian Blackford said, the new SNP team at Westminster will be a strong and united opposition, standing up for Scotland in the face of the growing threats of Brexit and an extreme Tory government. I'm delighted to welcome fresh faces and expertise to the SNP's frontbench team. Our newly elected MPs bring a wealth of talent and experience from their careers in our NHS, schools, business, journalism and international affairs. The SNP won a landslide victory at the general election on a mandate to hold an independence referendum, while the Tories and their Brexit plans were overwhelmingly rejected by people in Scotland. So, I mean, several friends of the show listed there on the new front bench. Yeah, we've got some real A-listers there. Who's kind of jumping out to you there? Who are you excited to see?
Well, obviously, I'm delighted that Kirsten has been re-elected and joining the front bench. I think that's absolutely fantastic. I didn't know that. So I'm really pleased about that. Anne McLaughlin, again, she's a personal friend of mine. She is on the Socialist Executive, and now obviously her involvement within the group will be limited, but no doubt you know it's still invaluable. A great advocate for women's rights and all the rest of it. So that, I think that's a fantastic appointment. John Nicholson, I always thought it was a travesty that John lost his seat. He's a consummate MP, an absolute gentleman, a real gentleman, and his knowledge in journalism and media is just unsurpassed. So that's going to stand us in good stead. He's got a real good mix in there of. Well, I mean, they're all seasoned MPs, they're all seasoned politicians. And the other one, of course, obviously, Alan Smith, fantastic advocate for Europe and stuff like that. So, you know, and Kirsty's proven a formidable deputy leader down in Westminster. So, you know, I think he's got it right. And you know, 100%. The end of that there reinforces what I said earlier on in the show about the fact that Scotland did not embrace any of the Brexit proposals by the Tories, no matter what their majority is. You know, it's the majority in Scotland that we need to be concerned about, not the majority of the UK.
Yeah. And one thing I thought was really interesting there was that they're now referring to the SNP frontbench as the shadow, as a shadow cabinet. They're shadow chancellor, shadow foreign secretary. Previously, those were just spokespeople. So I think it's nice. It's somewhat similar to the way the SNP changed the name from the Scottish Executive to the Scottish Government when they took power at Holyrood. I think it just makes a big difference in how you're perceived. But anyway, moving on to the Labour leadership. The SNP has said Labour is still hopelessly out of touch with Scotland after leadership contender Jess Phillip refused to accept Scotland's right to hold an independence referendum in a BBC interview today. In an interview with Good Morning Scotland, Ms Phillips said, "I don't think we should have another referendum on Scottish independence," and claimed a majority did not support a referendum, despite the SNP winning more than 80% of seats in Scotland on a mandate to hold that independence referendum. Tommy Shepherd MP responded, saying, "These comments smack of arrogance and the same high-handed dismissive attitude that's caused support for Labour to collapse in Scotland. Labour clearly hasn't learned a thing and is still hopelessly out of touch if it thinks it can ignore democracy and deny people in Scotland a choice over our future. As long as Labour politicians think they can lecture from Westminster and refuse to respect Scotland's right to self-determination, they will continue to fade into political irrelevance." Meanwhile, the Corbynite Rebecca Long-Bailey formally entered the race too, promising to lead the party as a proud socialist defending the policy direction that Jeremy Corbyn had pursued. She also commented on Scotland, saying it had been a mistake for Labour to be involved in Better Together. Long-Bailey said it was an example of Labour being too close to the establishment, prompting howls of outrage from Labour figures such as Duncan Hothersall. Ian Murray, Scotland's most resilient MP of recent years, also announced that he would be standing for the deputy leadership of the party and emphasised his ability to assemble a broad coalition of support. And that last line, I mean, a broad coalition of support in his particular constituency pretty much means Tories will vote for me.
Aye, basically, being the only panda at Edinburgh Zoo.
So what do you think of these statements first from Jess Phillips and then from Rebecca Long-Bailey?
Jess, absolutely laughable. Not only that, the fact that she also reinforced the fact that she would have no hesitation in pressing the button with regards to the nuclear deterrent. I find it absolutely reprehensible that she can reflect on the recent return of the sole MP for Labour and say that they've got as much of a mandate in Scotland as what they have. Effectively, that's what she's saying. Effectively, she's saying, Scotland doesn't matter, the SNP don't matter. The fact that their membership dwarfs our membership in Scotland by, 5 to 1? Is absolutely laughable. It really is. Rebecca Long-Bailey, on the other hand, is not what I would say an out, like revolutionary socialist. She has, definitely left-sided views, and socialist tendencies. I didn't think of her being a complete Corbynite flag waver, but I'm liking the tone of how she's sort of like set it out, that that she is open to a reasonable discussion.
I mean, we've always thought that the Corbyn himself and his wing of the party were a lot softer on the question of independence than the Blairites, for example.
Yeah. Well, the big enigma for me, and I think I've said it on the programme a few times, is the fact that I'm really perplexed with Corbyn because on the one hand, when he was elected leader, I was really happy, as being a backbench socialist, all those years, cutting his teeth under people like Nye Bevan and all the rest of it, that he was all for a free Palestine and a unified Ireland, but he was a wee bit lukewarm to the possibility of an independent Scotland. So it didn't quite ring true with me. Along with the fact that he is a self-confessed Republican. and yet he wants to be part of the very establishment that Westminster dwells in. Yeah. So again, that sort of like doesn't really fit, too squarely on my shoulders. His whole attitude towards the keeping the nuclear deterrent in Scotland, and his stance, widely known that he's for full disarmament and all the rest of it. Again, it just small holes in his CV for that issue. But so I'll be interested to see. I'll take a keen eye in how Rebecca Long Bailey goes forward. And as for Ian Murray being deputy leader, well, that's just laughable.
Okay. Well, on that note, we'll move on. And in Brexit news, the SNP has warned that Boris Johnson's Brexit bill risks inflicting hostile environment 2.0, with the party ramping up calls on opposition parties to back the SNP's amendments, which seek to protect and strengthen the rights of EU nationals in the UK. With Parliament returning from recess and MPs set to begin voting on the next stage of the withdrawal agreement this evening, the SNP has tabled amendments to challenge the UK government's plans, which include securing the rights of EEA and Swiss citizens residing in the UK automatically rather than having to apply, and also having the right to a physical document proving their status. The amendment would restrict UK government ministers from arbitrarily amending immigration rules to restrict the range of persons eligible for leave to enter or remain in the UK. Ensuring that people entitled to benefit from the citizens' rights protections in the bill did not miss out on registering as a citizen of the UK because of the level of fees currently being charged, and removing the power being provided to ministers to make regulations about judicial review of certain immigration decisions. The SNP's immigration spokesperson Stuart MacDonald said, "As the next stage of Boris Johnson's damaging Brexit bill comes before Parliament, it's vital that opposition parties back the SNP in protecting the rights of our fellow EU nationals who have made Scotland and the UK their home and who now face being plunged into further instability. We cannot allow this reckless right-wing Tory government to push ahead with its Brexit plan, which risks inflicting hostile environment 2.0, this time on EU nationals who live and work in the UK, including in our vital NHS." And I mean, these are things that the USIS, especially Ellen Hofer, regular host of the show here, has been fighting for very hard recently. Yeah. The 3 Million have been doing a lot of campaigning in England as well. First of all, the making right to remain and settled status an automatic thing rather than something that you have to apply for. Yeah. We've already seen people who have been rejected from that process for reasons that are unclear and without an appeal process. So that's a big step, and also the idea of having some sort of physical token, something that you can show at hospitals or whatever, to show that you are to work to employers, that you are entitled to be here, you are entitled to work. Yeah. What do you think? I mean, do you think these proposals are going to get any attention in Westminster?
This should have been sorted out ages ago, years ago. It should have been the forefront. When the UK stupidly shot itself in the foot, this should have been discussed first and foremost. This it doesn't personally affect me. It inadvertently affects me. My son Scott, his girlfriend is Polish national. She was doing a 5-year teaching course at Aberdeen University, and because of Brexit, she's decided that she's cutting that by 1 year because she doesn't want to live in the UK anymore. So that then means that I'm going to lose possibly a future daughter-in-law. I'm certainly going to lose my son because he's going to obviously follow his girlfriend, and hopefully they'll be able to relocate into Poland or Brussels. But again, they don't know the state of the situation either with regards to her status. She hasn't applied for anything UK-wise because she feels that it is deeply undemocratic. And the fact that she, will be forced to finish her studies back in the EU, as opposed to finishing a English course that she was doing in order to teach English to EU nationals.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. I mean, people who have chosen to come here, people who have come to Britain for whatever reason, whether it's for education, for work, whatever it is, people who've chosen to come here. And I mean, I think honestly, the SNP statement there kind of understates it, because there is already a hostile environment towards EU migrants. EU nationals living in the UK are already facing a hostile environment because they're being asked to apply to stay in their own homes.
But not only that, and it's not just the EU nationals that it's affecting, because now my son Scott is deciding as to whether he's going to stay in Scotland, possibly to do a postgrad. So there are going to be students out there that are going to be rethinking their general direction of travel, and are we going to stay in Scottish universities? So therefore, the universities are going to lose out. You know what I mean? Because not just EU nationals are going to think twice about studying in Scotland, but Scottish people are going to think twice about it as well. And with the possibility of the erosion of the Erasmus programme as well, which would inhibit Scottish students to go abroad and study, like take a year out and do a year somewhere else, Germany and Spain or in France. It's an absolute riot. So that's why I say it should have been sorted out first and foremost. And it should have been unequivocal to say, look, if you're an EU national living in Britain today, then there's a card to say so, and there's a card to say that you can either continue as, or on exiting you can give it up. And that would be the way that it is. Now, as we all know, that EU nationals can vote in Scotland. But the Tories are so resident to not allowing EU nationals to have a say in England. And it just, again, as you say, it just reinforces this ramping up of the hostile environment. And it's funny that Stuart frames it in that 2.0 thing, because it kind of gives it a kind of a die-hard feel.
It's. I mean, as I say, I don't really think it's hostile environment 2.0. I think it's just a continuation of the same set of policies, the same set of attitudes that have been in this Tory government since 2010. But
and I fully expect to see maybe not a continuation of the Windrush scandal, because thankfully between Labour and the SNP, we actually had that exposed last year, and the government were forced into many an apology and many a climb down. But it still backs up that rhetoric. During the festive period, I rewatched the thing on Netflix, the Brexit.
The Big Hack?
No, the Brexit one with Benedict Cumberbatch. Where he was playing
Dominic Cummings.
Dominic Cummings. And I see, when you realise what they were targeting, and how he was circling on the board, and and what's
it's a really viciously racist,
and the whole narrative by Aaron Banks and Nigel Farage, and it is set. What was that great thing? I can't remember who wrote it. Us and Them. It just puts you in that situation of, it's very much us and them.
Well, moving on now to Iran, where dozens of people have been killed in a crush in the southeastern Iranian city of Kerman, where hundreds of thousands of mourners gathered for the burial of Qasem Soleimani, the leader of Iran's Revolutionary Guards Quds Force, who was assassinated in a US drone strike 4 days ago. The ISNA news agency put the death toll at 50 by early evening local time, with many more injured. A video reportedly from the scene showed several mourners lying on the floor, with others rubbing their chests and administering CPR. Some of those on the ground had their faces covered with jackets and scarves. A huge crowd of mourners filled the streets of Soleimani's hometown this morning, following similar massive crowds in Baghdad, Tehran, Qom, Mashhad and Avaz in the last few days. The crowds were the largest since those that turned out for the 1989 funeral of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. The burial ceremony scheduled for this afternoon was cancelled after the deaths, the head of the committee overseeing the process said to the news agency. Addressing the vast crowd of mourners before the crush, the Revolutionary Guard's commander, Major General Hossein Salami, said, "The martyr Qasem Soleimani is more powerful now that he is dead. The enemy killed him unjustly." So we are just going to move on. We're running fairly short of time. But because the SNP has ramped up calls on the UK government to work round the clock to de-escalate tensions between the US and Iran, warning the Tory government that it must mount a robust defence of international law and order with the Trump administration. Leading for the SNP on a statement in the House of Commons today on the security situation in the Middle East, Stuart McDonald MP criticised Boris Johnson for failing to immediately convene a meeting of the National Security Council following the assassination of Soleimani in Iraq, choosing to do so only after Johnson had concluded his holiday in the Caribbean. Stuart McDonald, who is the SNP's defence spokesman, said, "The assassination of Soleimani on Iraqi soil by the Trump administration is a dangerous escalation that breaks with international norms and rules. It risks plunging the region into further instability, with its implications potentially being felt globally. With tensions rising and the very real danger of the situation descending into deeper conflict, it's vital that the UK government ends mealy-mouthed sound bites and instead works round the clock to urgently de-escalate the crisis, including a robust and honest response with US counterparts on the importance of abiding by international law, as any good ally would." So, I mean, do you imagine that Britain's influence can rein in Donald Trump on aggression with Iran?
No.
Then we'll move on. In Spain today, the Spanish socialist leader Pedro Sánchez secured parliamentary backing by a wafer-thin majority to form a coalition government, ending a lengthy political stalemate. After nearly a year of caretaker government, Sánchez won the simple majority he needed by 2 votes, with the support of representatives from smaller regional parties and abstention by others, such as the independence-supporting Catalan party Esquerra Republicana de Catalunya. He and his coalition ally Pablo Iglesias, the leader of the left-wing Unidas Podemos, have said that they will push for tax increases on high earners and companies and roll back labour reforms passed by a previous Conservative government. But without a solid majority in Parliament, the coalition may struggle to pass legislation and will need to negotiate with other parties on a case-by-case basis. "I trust that we can overcome the atmosphere of irritation and tension and that we can recover a space for consensus and for agreement," Sánchez told Parliament ahead of the vote. So, I mean, this is, I think, good news for Spain to have a stable government and a left-wing government for
Even better,
the first time in some years. And it also seems that at the very least there is a truce there between them and some of the Catalan independence supporters.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that the Spanish government can possibly work as the Scottish government has to work by garnering overall, well, not overall support, but garnering support from within rather than having an outright majority. You know, I've often thought that, you know, Spain, like Portugal, really should be a socialist country, you know, it's edifying to hear that that they are pursuing some socialist values there. You know, with the reforms to workers' rights. You know, pretty much front and centre of that, and if they can be more sympathetic to the province of Catalonia, then you know that would go a long way to ease the tensions between the two, and possibly come to a more dignified agreement with the direction of travel for Catalonia. I mean, you know, Catalonia is very socialista.
Yeah.
So you can only hope that you know. Because I mean, you got to remember some of the scenes that we seen last year in Catalonia were really, really brutal.
Yeah.
And that's the fact that the police were being instructed by the right-wing government, you know, to take a heavy-handed approach to that. You rarely see scenes like that in other socialist countries, the likes of Portugal and Poland even. So you know, if it's a matter of maybe not a meeting of hearts, but maybe a meeting of minds, then definitely it could be beneficial for the whole of Spain, not just beneficial to Catalonia.
Well, we certainly hope so. It has been a long time for Spain since it's had any sort of stability in its government. But just finally, we come on to Public Health Minister Joe Fitzpatrick has again called on the UK government to work with the Scottish government to tackle the rising number of drugs deaths in Scotland. In a letter, the minister also asks Home Secretary Priti Patel to confirm that an appropriate UK government minister will attend a summit on the crisis in Glasgow this year. The Scottish Government has taken a range of actions to address the public health emergency Scotland faces in terms of drug-related deaths, including setting up a dedicated task force to inform steps to reduce harm caused by drugs and advise on further changes in practice or in the law which could help to save lives. Almost £800 million has been invested by the Scottish Government to tackle problem alcohol and drug use since 2008. And the 2018 Alcohol and Drug Strategy set out how an additional £20 million per annum is being used to improve local prevention, treatment and recovery services in areas across the country. So, this has been something that's been ongoing for a while. Scottish Government calling for powers over things like decriminalisation, over safe consumption facilities, things like that. And we've so far seen just a flat refusal from the UK government. Do you suspect that there's going to be any change now that Joe Fitzpatrick has written this letter and to a new government?
If it was anyone else bar Priti Patel, possibly. But going on her track record, I would say Joe's on to hiding to nothing. Joe has done some fantastic work on this in conjunction with Alison Thewlis last year. Arguing for the safe consumption rooms. But the UK government have just flatly refused it. And I don't see Priti Patel dancing up and down the chamber, to Westminster, the SNP Westminster's group, please. I want it to happen, but
this week we saw Annie Wells saying that the Scottish government needed to do more on drugs death, we're in a position where the Scottish government is saying, well, we'd love to do more, but there's only so much your government will let us do.
The only thing that I can say about Annie Wells is some people shouldn't be out without their parents. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it is a real tragedy. Obviously we've mentioned on the show before that the way drugs deaths are counted in Scotland is not the same as in England. So when you hear these figures compared, there are some kind of caveats to that, but there is a real problem. And do you suspect that this is just a cultural thing? Are Scots just more likely to take overdoses, or is there something underlying in Scotland that's making us get worse in this area?
The proposals that we have put forward. Earlier on, I mentioned Portugal there. The SNP took a delegation to Lisbon to find out their approach and the mobile drug consumption rooms that are currently going around Lisbon. And Lisbon has had a 95% success rate in dealing with drug addiction. And the alcohol problem in Lisbon itself is not an issue because there's so much more of a relaxed attitude towards alcohol. Yeah, I mean, it's got a great club scene and all the rest of it, whatnot, what have you. But the whole European attitude towards alcohol, I think, has, in the last 20, 30 years, has rubbed off on Scotland. I don't think that Scotland has got as bad an alcohol issue as what it had when I was a kid. Now, I made reference to Gordon last night, or maybe not last night, but on a previous episode, that, you know, when I was a kid growing up, Jakey was down and out, you know, somebody that lived on, you know, the roughest of rough, you know, like gas and milk bottles and things like that and stuff like that. You know, and they were predominantly what you would class as a homeless person. But now the homeless person seems to be, sadly, ever more present on our streets. But you know, some of them are not solely just alcoholics or solely just drug dependents. You know, they've got deep social underlying issues there. You know, obviously, you know, psychological issues as well that need to be addressed. So the Scottish Government's proposals was not one of just, you know, give us all the powers over drugs and we'll sort of like thing. They wanted to do it on a more holistic setting to try and find the underlying problems that, you know, A, causes homelessness, B, causes people to take drugs in the first place. You know, and that includes things from mental health, depression, suicide, all the rest of it. It's a plethora of work that we've done, and yet the UK government still won't allow us to pursue the findings that we've come up with.
Yeah, I mean, I saw some research in the US recently that said that rates of, I mean, they've got an opioid crisis all over America, but they said that they compared places where car factories had shut down and where they hadn't, where they'd stayed open, and they found that rates of suicide and drug overdose were double in the areas where the factories had closed down. And I think that is one of the legacies really of Thatcherism, is that we deindustrialized, and so many of those communities, it's suicide and drug deaths, it's deaths of despair. That's really what we're looking at.
Yeah, and then when you put Thatcherism next to capitalism, and the pursuit of capitalism, it is always the workers that lose out where capitalism wins.
Absolutely.
Do you know, because I mean, Scotland doesn't really have, I mean, the last time that Scotland had a car industry was back in the 70s. I made this point again last night. But, you know, you would think that, just say for argument's sake, when Diageo's decided to close down the distillery at Kilmarnock, and there was a loss of 550 jobs there, the deprivation in Kilmarnock, you know, because there was not any money going back into that area, some of the areas in Kilmarnock really got run down. And, you know, so you need that. I mean, capitalism and socialism pretty much have to coexist. And, you know, it's just unfortunate. Well, yeah, but it's just unfortunate that one seems to, you know, always win over the other. And unfortunately, obviously, you know what I would want.
Well, on that note, we are just out of time. It's been a very busy hour. We had a lot to talk about. So I would like to thank Chris for joining me. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us as well. This is my first show of the new year, so it's been a pleasure to be here. As you may or may not know, we did achieve our initial crowdfunding target just at the tail end of 2019. But we are still asking for donations and for people to sign up as supporters. That regular income is what enables us to expand what we're doing here. There are a lot of things we'd love to do. We've talked a lot about going out and doing a question time type show around the country. We're going to be at the march on Saturday, the Independence March in Glasgow on Saturday. There are all sorts of other events we'd like to do. There are some sporting events that we're looking into, some cultural events we're looking into being at. And we want to be able to do all of this, become a proper full-service TV channel. We can only do it with your support. So if you are able to, please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/donate or /register if you want to sign up as a regular supporter. Until tomorrow night, though, we will be back then with another guest. And until then, thank you again to Chris. Thank you again to you.
Thanks again, Kenny.
And we will see you tomorrow. Thanks. Have a great night.